Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. Lee over at Inside the Distance Boxing, which is a great channel. Go and give him a sub, Lee. Inside the Distance, the channel's called. He made a video regarding the supposed knockdown of Tyson Fury by Jai Opetaia and the fact that Opetaia was sent home, supposedly, or left early, maybe, after the alleged incident. Now, Lee said, and I agree with him totally, it doesn't mean anything. Sparring is sparring. Sparring is learning. Sparring is practice. Sparring is sharpening your tools. And sparring, above all else, is a place where you make mistakes. You eradicate mistakes, you iron them out, and then on the night, you don't make those mistakes. Someone in my comment section of the video that I did on this subject, and I'm in complete agreement with Lee, this guy said, look, if you're not getting knocked down, if you're not getting battered in sparring, you're doing something wrong. You're not doing what you should be doing, because that's where you learn and that's where you practice and that's where you sharpen your tools. But Lee at Inside the Distance did say something that stuck in my mind, because it's an issue, it's a topic that very rarely gets mentioned, and that is gym wars. And really, I want to talk about the importance, if there is any, of gym wars. Because if you're having what are basically no holds barred, well, within reason, obviously within the Queensberry rules, wars in the gym, that's obviously going to take it out of you. And I've known a couple of fighters who've been involved in this type of so-called training. I mean, it's not really training to me. It's having a fight behind closed doors. And I'll be honest with you, I think it did take, a few years off their career. I know one guy, I'm not going to mention his name because, he doesn't know I'm doing this video yet. But he had one particular war with Sam Eggington, and they were both John Peg fighters. Sam is, and this other guy was, and it was stopped because it was just too bloody, too much. There was just too much going on, and you're meant to be preparing for a fight, perhaps, and you're going to end up with cuts and bruises and maybe a busted nose or whatever. That's not what the gym is supposed to be for. However, let's play devil's advocate here and say that gym wars do toughen up a fighter. They do give him or her a taste of what it's like to have to dig deep, to have to, you really ask questions of yourself. You've really got to show your fortitude. You've got to show grit. You've got to do the thing you don't want to do, which is take a break or quit or whatever. You've got to work through it. There is that argument to be made. And of course, let's not forget that someone like, if you remember the Mayweather gym, they'd have great, long, elongated confrontations where the fighters were just beating the crap out of each other, and they weren't even rounds. They were more like a case of, the sort of fight you'd find in a field between a load of traveller lads. You ever see any of those videos of Amy McGinley and Dan Rooney and all that lot? Anyway, I'm digressing. So you're involved in these wars. Maybe occasional gym wars are a good thing, just occasional ones. Doing this consistently, like at the Mayweather gym, that's going to take years off you. Another example is the Kronk gym. When Manny Stewart, first started it back in the late 70s, he started the Kronk, and it was a sweatbox venue. You'd go in there, the thermostat would be banged up. You'd be talking, and Tommy Hearns was obviously the king of the Kronk, but you had people like Jimmy Paul and, well, an awful lot of fighters went through those doors, didn't they? Hill McKenty was another one, of the early ones I'm thinking of. But you would have these fights, and they were fights. You weren't practicing, you were just having a fight in immensely hot temperatures, and it toughened you up. The problem with that was, and if you've seen Tommy Hearns now, who doesn't speak particularly lucidly, and a few of the other fighters who went through that, it takes years off not just your career, but your life. Now, okay, Tommy Hearns was, never say die, no quitting him, fought like a demon throughout his entire career. From start to finish, he was an absolute warrior. But you've got to wonder, all those Kronk wars, that environment, that energy sapping, brain cell killing environment, surely it had an adverse effect physiologically and neurologically. It may have toughened you up mentally. You may have been able to, walk through walls to get that win. But it can't be good long term for a fighter. And surely, even though we want to see great fights, and even though we love, blood and guts wars, you've got to think about these fighters later on in life. But as I said a moment ago, you could make the argument that the occasional gym war is a good thing. Now, I'm thinking of one example, and that was Sugar Ray Leonard when he was coming back to fight Marvin Hagler. He had a few fights, under proper regulations behind closed doors. I think he had 3 is what I remember reading. I'm going back 30 years, but I read this first. But it is, the thing of legend that to prepare for Hagler, Leonard had proper, with judges and everything, behind closed doors. And he said to these guys, put it on me, really put it on me. I think one of them was Kevin Howard, actually, who he actually fought properly, like in a proper bout. I can't remember who the other 2 fighters were. But they were proper wars. They were proper boxing matches under rules and regulations behind closed doors, because Leonard knew he had to sharpen his tools. He had to put himself in a position where, the guy was trying to take his head off. And of course, no one could emulate Marvin Hagler. That was, you weren't going to get someone of that quality to come and do that, to come and have a behind closed doors war, because there was no one to compare to Hagler. But it at least put him in a position where he was facing adversity. So I think that on the subject of gym wars, yes, there is a place for them occasionally, but you can end up, doing too much. You can end up leaving it all in a gym. You can end up demoralized. You can end up cut, battered, maybe even go into a fight semi-concussed. You just never know. Too much of that stuff will take it out of you. It will take too much out of you. And there is a very thin line between going too far and doing just enough to sharpen your tools and to make sure that when you go into that ring, you are mentally prepared, emotionally prepared, so you feel really confident and so on, and physically prepared. So just a few thoughts on gym wars, which we hear about. Before I go, let's also mention what used to be called smokers, which were fights that these were proper fights. They were unofficial in the sense that there wasn't a commission running them. But smokers in America they used to take place in clubs and rather seedy sort of places. Maybe maybe in the basement of a club or something like that. And 1 or 2, like I say, seedier venues would hold them. Especially in places like Philadelphia, a smoker was a proper fight, and very often you'd have people, gambling, illicit gambling, and all that sort of thing going on. It was all a bit, probably some hoods were involved, some gangsters were involved, and all this sort of thing. But very often, young prospects, sometimes in their teens, would be taken to these places and put into these contests. And very often, if they were young, the people in charge of them, the trainers, would lie about their age, but they'd have proper fights in these environments, these smoky, seedy, rough and tumble environments to toughen them up mentally. One person that did it, which is probably one of the most famous examples, was Mike Tyson. When he was still a teenager, he was in his early teens, and Teddy Atlas would take him to these, smoker venues, and he'd lie about his age. Yeah, the kid's 17. He's only 14 or 13. And he'd be beating up grown men. But he's just one example. Lots and lots of fighters, especially from the 70s, 60s, late 60s, throughout the 70s, were involved in the what were called smokers. And you could argue that that's a way of toughening fighters up. But at least it had some structure, some sort of structure to it. A lot of gym wars will develop randomly, off the cuff. I mean, the worst example I can think of was somebody allowed Nick Blackwell to spar after he'd had a swelling on the brain, and he ended up collapsing, having to have an operation, a neurological operation to remove a blood clot. Sometimes, I mean, he should have been sparring anyway, of course, because after that you don't go anywhere near a bloody boxing ring once you've dodged that bullet. But of course, he escaped having an operation. The swelling went down, and then he got in the ring, sparred, and did get a blood clot and had to have an operation. I mean, look, it's no joke being in that boxing ring, even behind closed doors. And gym wars, smokers, whatever you want to call them, they have their place occasionally, but yeah, I would say too much of it is going to take years off you. Anyway, just a few thoughts. So give me your opinions below. Let me know what you think. If you're new to the channel, you could subscribe. That'd be great. Hit the subscribe button. Takes a second. And also give a little jab on that like button as well, because they count them apparently. So I'm told anyway. It's all to do with the algorithms. I don't know what the fuck an algorithm is, but you've heard the word. I'll pretend I know what it means. Anyway, subscribe. Hit the like button. Thanks a lot. I'll catch you later. Bye for now.